Okay, America, will the real John Hanson please stand? Before you, you see two pictures of our first black president, John Hanson. The one they portray, the man looking white, and the original portrait of John Hanson looking as dark as I do. Cover up in America must cease. It's time to tell the truth. This is the awakening that God is exposing to allow us to understand how deep the conspiracy goes to keep the black men and women from knowing their heritage. Oh God, help us. Or is this just Muslim propaganda? Again, we have two articles that we're going to look at. Again, you know what I say to you, research the information for yourself. But today, I am definitely going to present the two different articles to you so that you can make your own decision. Ladies and gentlemen, to end Black History Month, we want to end this month with some information that many of us don't know. And that is, who is John Hanson? Can someone tell me who John Hanson is? He was born April 14th or April 3rd, 1721. And he died November 15th, 1783. He was a merchant and public official from Maryland during the era of the American Revolution. In 1779, Hanson was elected as a delegate to the Continental Congress after serving in a variety of roles for the Patriot cause in Maryland. He signed the Articles of Confederation in 1781 after Maryland finally joined the other states in ratifying them. In November 1781, he was elected President of the Constitutional Congress and became the first president to serve a one-year term under the provision of the Articles of Confederation. While George Washington is recognized by historians as the first president of the United States, having served under the current United States Constitution, some biographies of Hanson have made the unconventional argument that Hanson was the first holder of the office. John Hanson was born in Port Tobacco Parish in Charles County in the Province of Maryland on April 3, 1721, which in the Martin calendar system is equivalent to April 14th. Sources published prior to a 1940 geographical study sometimes listed his birth date as April 13th or his year of birth as 1715. So I guess we had some problems with our calendar back in those days. Hanson was born on a plantation called Mulberry Grove into a wealthy and prominent family. His parents were Samuel and Elizabeth Hanson. Samuel Hanson was a planter who owned more than 1,000 acres and held a variety of political offices, including serving 2 terms in the Maryland General Assembly. John Hanson was of English ancestry. His grandfather, also named John, came to Charles County, Maryland, as an indentured servant around 1661. In 1876, a writer named George Hanson placed John Hanson in his family tree of Swedish-American descendants from 4 Swedish brothers who immigrated to New Sweden in 1642. This story was often repeated over the next century, but scholarly research in the late 20th century showed that John Hanson was of English heritage and not related to those Swedish-American Hansons. Little is known about Hanson's early life. He was presumably privately tutored, as was customary among the gentry of his time and place. He followed his father's path as a planter, slave owner, and public official. He was often referred to as John Hanson, Jr., to distinguish him from an older man of the same name. About 1744, he married Jane Conti, 1728 through 1812, with whom he would have 8 children. Their son Peter Conti Hanson, 1758 through 1776, died in the Battle of Fort Washington during the American Revolutionary War. Their oldest son, Alexander Conti Hanson Sr., 1749 through 1806, was a notable essayist. Alexander Hanson is sometimes confused with his son, Alexander Conti Hanson Jr., 1786 through 1819, who became a newspaper editor and United States Senator. What's so important about John Hanson? Why are we bringing him to the forefront during this last day of Black History Month? If you look at his portrait, you will see that John Hanson was a black man. So he is considered really the first black president of the United States, even though his term only lasted 1 year. Hanson changed course in 1769, apparently to better pursue his business interests. He resigned from the General Assembly, sold his land in Charles County, and moved to Frederick County and Western Maryland. There he held a variety of offices, including deputy surveyor, sheriff, and county treasurer. When relations between Great Britain and the colonies became a crisis in 1774, Hanson became one of Frederick County's leading patriots. He chaired a town meeting that passed a resolution opposing the Boston Port Act in 1775. He was a delegate to the Maryland Convention, an extra-legal body convened after the colony or colonial assembly had been prorogated. With the other delegates, he signed the Association of Freemen on July 26, 1775, which expressed hope for reconciliation with Great Britain, but also called for military resistance to enforcement of the coercive acts. With hostility underway, Hanson chaired the Frederick County Committee of Observation, part of the patriotic organization that assumed control of local government, responsible for recruiting and arming soldiers. Hanson proved to be an excellent organizer, and Frederick County sent the first Southern troop to join George Washington's army. Because funds were scarce, Hanson frequently paid soldiers and others with his own money. In June of 1776, Hanson chaired the Frederick County meeting that urged provincial leaders in Annapolis to instruct Maryland's delegate in the Constitutional Congress to declare independence from Great Britain. While Congress worked on the Declaration of Independence, Hanson was in Frederick County making gun locks, storing powder, guarding prisoners, raising money and troops, dealing with Tories, and doing the myriad other tasks which went with being chairman of the Committee of Observation. Hanson was elected to the newly reformed Maryland House of Delegates in 1777, the first of 5 annual terms. In December 1779, the House of Delegates named Hanson as a delegate to the Second Constitutional Congress. He began serving in Congress in Philadelphia in June 1780. Hanson came to Philadelphia with the reputation of having been the leading financier of the Revolution in Western Maryland, and soon he was a member of several committees dealing with finances. When Hanson was elected to Congress, Maryland was holding up the ratification of the Article of Confederation. The state, which did not have any claims on Western land, refused to ratify the article until the other states had seized their Western land claim. When the other states finally did so, the Maryland legislature decided in January 1781 to rectify the article. When Congress received notice of this, Hanson joined Daniel Carroll in signing the Article of Confederation on behalf of Maryland on March 1, 1781. With Maryland's endorsement, the articles officially went into effect. Many years later, some Hanson biographers claimed that Hanson had been instrumental in arranging the compromise and thus securing ratification of the article. But according to historian Ralph Levine, there is no documentary evidence of Hanson's options or actions in resolving the controversy. In 2009, John Hanson Memorial Association was incorporated in Frederick, Maryland, to create the John Hanson National Memorial and to both educate Americans about Hanson as well as counter the many myths written about him. The memorial includes a statue of President John Hanson and an interpretive setting in Frederick, Maryland, where Hanson lived between 1769 and his death in 1783. The memorial is in the Frederick County Courthouse courtyard at the corner of Court and West Patrick Streets. President of Congress. On November 5, 1781, Congress elected Hanson as President of the Constitutional Congress, or President of the Congress of the Confederacy, or President of Congress. Under the Article of Confederation, the United States had no executive branch. The President of Congress was a mostly ceremonial position, but the office did require Hanson to handle a good deal of correspondence and sign official documents. Hanson found the work tedious and considered resigning after just 1 week. Seizing his poor health and family responsibilities, colleagues urged him to remain because Congress at the moment lacked a quorum to choose a successor. Out of a sense of duty, Hanson remained in office, although his term as a delegate to Congress was nearly expired. Isn't this just like a black man? No matter what they try to do to make black people appear to be inferior, black people have a high sense of morality. The Maryland Assembly re-elected him as a delegate on November 28, 1781, and so Hanson continued to serve as president until November 4, 1782. The Article of Confederation stipulated that President of Congress serve 1-year terms, and Hanson became the first president to do so. Contrary to the claim of some of his later advocates, however, he was not the first president to serve under the Article, nor the first to be elected under the Articles. When the Articles went into effect in March 1781, Congress did not bother to elect a new president. Instead, Samuel Huntington continued serving a term that had already exceeded a year. On July 9, 1781, Samuel Johnson became the first man to be elected as President of Congress after the ratification of the Article. He declined the offer, however, perhaps to make himself available for a North Carolina gubernatorial election. Here is a picture of the bronze statue of Hanson in the National Statuary Hall collection. Now, again, as I did my research, I found this article that I just presented to you, but I'm also going to present to you right now an article that I believe was written by a black person, only because of what is said in the article. I'm going to leave you with this article, and you make your own decision about what do you think about what this article is saying. Compare both of the information, both of the articles, and make a decision for yourself about what is going on in America, and has anything really changed from the 1700s to 2016. A man or more, John Hanson. In the United States of America schools, their history books speak not of history, but instead his story. His story is the European account of perception of what happened, as where history is what's recorded. Here in America, you learn that the government can write a lie just like they can tell one. And if you're of color, your history is considered to be irrelevant if it's not in agreement to how the government has it recorded. America is stolen property. The tribe of Gate, whom they disgracefully called Indians, were given smallpox, whooping cough, measles, typhoid fever, mumps, rubella, and their children and women were raped. Their men were murdered, all so the Jewish elite could exterminate them and gain control of their land, in which this land here is America. So upon conquering the tribe of Gad, they then brought over the tribe of Judah, whom they called niggers, on cargo slave ships, and sold them as slaves. Both tribes were forced to take on the European holidays, customs, school system, religion, and were forced to worship an English god named Jesus, who was in no relation to their Hebrew God of Israel. So to make them feel inferior, they hired different Jewish fashions to go into the Hebrew text and omit the name of their God and replace it with Yahweh, and covered their tracks by making it trace in the Gam-a-ton, to the same letter in the Hebrew. So this way, they couldn't call on the name of their God to save them as they did in Egypt, Persia, Babylon, and Rome. They created a history for them and passed it off to their schools and press to make the world look upon them as savages and animals who needed to be civilized. They had to instill in the minds of white America of a people who were less inferior to their race. So not knowing any history, these tribes grew up in America being called by American names and worshiping in American religions and celebrating American history and fighting in American wars while never knowing they're not American and while never knowing their true history. Now, it's this part of the article that I have a problem with. Actually, calling Black Americans again the tribe of Israel and actually pinpointing America as the tribe of Gad and Judah. And when we actually look at history, we find that there were 10 tribes. Once they broke loose back in Solomon's day, part of Judah did remain behind. They got captured later. But it was the 10 tribes of Israel that got lost. So this is the discrepancy that I have with this article. Also, the fact that it mentioned that we're being called Americans and we're not actually American. Well, again, that's another discrepancy because you're called by the nation you were born under. This is what makes us now an American. We are American citizens. We're not citizens of Israel. We're not citizens of Africa. We are actually citizens of the nation, the United States of America. And that's just the bottom line. In America, you don't show your slaves important people of their race who took a stand against the government by fighting for justice. Nah, here in America, you teach them they have no history, so therefore they will feel as if they never accomplished anything and were less human than others. Increasing the moral and self-confidence within your slaves would make them feel as if they are somebody and would make them desire to be more than what they're told they can be. And this scared white America because if this people felt this way, they would start reading between lines that they were given and start asking questions and seeking the truth. These tribes were never taught that their founding fathers were Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Instead, white America gave them new history and taught them that their founding fathers were George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. As you can see, America has a history of creating false history to give unto the races it considers to be underneath the white race, which is why today the tribe of Judah thinks they never had a black president before, when truth is Barack Obama is not the first so-called black president. John Hanson was the first so-called black president, but 8 presidents overall. Barack Obama was picked to become president at Columbia University in 1981 by Zygmunt Brzezinski, and Henry Kissinger, two men working for the government elite known as the Illuminati. See, the government knows that there are some intellectual, independent people out there who will not buy into their account of history. So what did they do? Well, in order to throw off those who would think it was a black president before, they created a white image and attached onto him the black man's name. So, when people start to ask questions and wake up, they could then say, hey, that's a lie. There wasn't no black president before. See, John Hanson was a white guy, which is the same thing they do with their image of Christ, despite man being made from human soil, which is dark brown, and despite the scriptures describing Christ as a black man, despite all their deceptive ways to keep the truth hidden and concealed, the Most High still has a way of uncovering the lies that has been taught to his people and bringing it to their knowledge. So today, I am bringing you some pictures depicted on the internet about John Hanson, a light John Hanson and a dark John Hanson, the man who is known as the first President of the United States. The Continental Congress was the first government body established. The first three presidents of the Continental Congress was as follows: Penton Randolph, Henry Milton, and John Hancock. After John Hancock, three more men served as president, and they were Henry Lawrence, John Jay, Samuel Huntington. So the question is, so what happened to the Continental Congress? The Confederation was not ratified by all 13 states until March 1st, 1781, at which time the Continental Congress ceased to exist. So Huntington continued as Confederation president until he resigned in July 1781. Thus, technically, he was the first president of the United States, but their account of what happened tells you that George Washington was the first president. Question: so who became president after Huntington? Thomas McKean of Delaware was elected president of the United States in Congress Assembly in July 1781. Then after him, you have John Hanson, Elias Boudinot, Tom Mifflin, Richard Henry Lee, John Hancock, Nathaniel Gortham, Arthur St. Clair, Cyrus Griffin, and finally George Washington. You don't hear about the first president of the United States because the Article of Confederation was looked upon as an American failure. The individual states had too much power and nothing could be agreed upon. So America didn't want its failure to be known because America is perceived as a democracy. So a new doctrine needed to be written. A federal constitution wielding the disparate states into a nation was adopted in September 1787. George Washington was elected president of the United States under the new doctrine known as the Constitution by a vote of citizens in 1789. Lost history on purpose. John Hanson took office just as the Revolutionary War ended. Almost immediately, the troops demanded to be paid. as would be expected after any long war. There were no funds to meet the salaries. As a result, the soldiers threatened to overthrow the new government and put Washington on the throne as a monarch. All the members of Congress ran for their lives, leaving Hanson as the only guy left running the government. He somehow managed to calm the troops down and hold the country together. If he had failed, the government would have fallen almost immediately, and everyone would have been bowing to King Washington. In fact, Hanson sent 800 pounds of sterling silver by his brother Samuel Hanson to George Washington to provide the troops with shoes. Hanson, as president, ordered all foreign troops off American soil, as well as the removal of all foreign flags. This was quite the feat, considering the fact that so many European countries had a stake in the United States since the day following Columbus. Hanson established the Great Seal of the United States, which all presidents have since been required to use on all official documents. So now we know where the presidential seal came from, who created it. President Hanson also established the first Treasury Department, the first Secretary of War, and the first Foreign Affairs Department. Lastly, he declared that the fourth Thursday of every November was to be Thanksgiving Day, which is still true today. The Article of Confederation only allowed the president to serve a one-year term during any 3-year period, so Hanson actually accomplished quite a bit in such a little time. 6 other presidents were elected after him: Elias Boudinot in 1783, Thomas Mifflin in 1784, Richard Henry Lee in 1785, Nathan Gorman in 1786, Arthur St. Clair in 1787, and Cyrus Griffin in 1788, all prior to Washington taking office. So what happened? Why didn't we ever hear about the first 7 presidents of the United States? It's quite simple. The Article of Confederation didn't work well. The individual states had too much power and nothing could be agreed upon. A new doctrine needed to be written, something we know as the Constitution, and that leads us to the end of our story. George Washington was definitely not the first president of the United States. He was the first president of the United States under the Constitution we follow today. Why do you think America stopped printing the $2 bill? Because John Hanson also was on the $2 bill, and America can't let the people whom they teach have no history. See that they actually do have history, because it would instill in them hope and courage. Hope, courage, motivation, pride, and most of all, a sense of self beyond America history. The death and legacy. Hanson retired from public office after his one-year term as President of Congress in poor health. He died on November 15, 1783, while visiting Oxon Hill Manor in Prince George County, Maryland, the plantation of his nephew, Thomas Hawkins Hanson. He was buried there. Hanson owned at least 223 acres of land and 11 slaves at the time of his death. In 1898, Douglas H. Thomas, a descendant of Hanson, wrote a biography promoting Hanson as the first true president of the United States. Thomas became the driving force behind the selection of Hanson as one of the 2 people who would represent Maryland in the national Statuary Hall collection in Washington, D.C. Hanson was not initially on the short list for consideration, but he was chosen after lobbying by the Maryland Historical Society. In 1903, bronze statues of Hanson and Charles Carroll by sculptor Richard E. Brooks were added to Statuary Hall. Hanson is currently located on the second floor of the Senate connecting corridor. Small versions of these two statues sit on the President's desk in the Senate chamber of the Maryland State House. A question arose. What is on the back of the $2 bill? The back of the $2 bill has an engraving of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And the image is a man who has dark skin and wearing a powdered wig while sitting at the table just to the left of the men standing in the center of the engraving. This dark-skinned man is John Hanson in his position as President of the Constitutional Congress. However, there is discrepancy about the man on the $2 bill being John Hanson.